Cool. We can just roll.
Right? Yeah, exactly. As if we don't always just do it live anyway. I welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Ash. We're going to talk about birth, but I know Ash as not only a good friend now, but as a war correspondent not too long ago, and as a fantastic author now. We're going to get into all that stuff. But there's like a button that I have to press that does this thing with the music, and it's all fancy and stuff, and that wasn't it. That wasn't it either. All right, and this wouldn't be complete unless we played a little message from one of our sponsors, the crazy and deeply unique Dust cryptocurrency.
Magic Dust, a new cryptocurrency by the makers of Nifty Wizards. If you don't trust me, trust Joe from Cincinnati. Hey guys, I started mining dust, and you know what? I really like it. It's super cool, and all my friends like me better now. Listen to Bobby from Kentucky. You know, I really like dust because at first I thought it was crack. At first I thought it was cocaine, and now I know that it's not, and it made it a little bit more boring, but actually I'm still doing it, and I gotta say I'm totally happy.
So
I really like that the ending is actually the guy scratching his neck going, what the hell?
Yeah. That is an appropriate response. That's actually Kurt, the head wizard at Chirp, playing around and making that. He actually created the Dust cryptocurrency for the Nifty Wizards game that he also created. And it's now like Dust is now kind of everywhere, and you can mine it in Telegram channels just by having conversations. And that's actually the inspiration for something that is coming very, very soon to Chirp. So there's a few updates. Just we'll get out of the way for Chirp. We're going to be doing integration with Twitter, so you're going to be able to auto post from Chirp right to Twitter, so you can start at Chirp instead of having to do two different things at once. We're in the final testing phase for that. And we're going to have Telos coming in and doing a cryptocurrency test where anytime you post or like or comment in the Telos channel, you're actually going to get little micro payments of the Telos cryptocurrency, which is then going to expand, if it works, and we think it will, to a bunch of different projects. Anyway, so that's kind of where we're at. We're waiting on a couple of really, really key features to finish testing out on Chirp. But this is my friend Ash. You've been posting a bunch on Chirp, and I'm super excited about that. We're always in the gratitudes channel. I can expect the awesomest videos, the coolest things from hopefully this is going to keep working here. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Chopped up a little bit. I see posted music all the time, like that. You're a huge part of the early community there, and so I just wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, not a problem. It's fun. I feel like I'm still exploring it, and I'm really proud of you for trying to create something that's interesting and new, and that feels far more community based than what we see on social media. And I dig it. So it almost makes me feel better to post on Chirp than it does in other places. And so bravo for working that out.
We're working on stuff. So if you could, just because this audience won't know you as much as
Sure.
Our coffee audience or what have you. When we first started chatting, you were still a correspondent in war zones.
That's true.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and just kind of what that was like?
So I think the first time that we did a podcast together, you were doing something called Baboon Room, I believe. And
way back in the day.
way back in the day. And I had kind of permanently sat myself in Iraq. I had just come from Turkey. And I remember that because the focus of kind of the first interview we did was around the Turkey experience, where I had gotten swept up in the attempted coup and gotten detained for something like 14 hours. And had decided at that point that I would be safer in Iraq than I was in Turkey.
Which is messed up.
Right. But the thing is that, you know, I had already started going into Iraq from Turkey, and then was trying to decide anyway if it was going to be a permanent base, because I knew stuff was coming. And, you know, with the rise of ISIS, or Daesh in Arabic, there was a lot of talk at that point of multiple coalition of countries from all over the world that were going to basically just do one big operation in Iraq and Syria. And so kind of with all of that going on underneath the surface, a lot of freelance journalists were going, oh, we need to be closer. We need to get in. We need to make sure. And so it worked out for me, especially because I had made connections with friends of mine who are also friends of ours, the Preemptive Love Coalition, who's an NGO based out of there. And they had, you know, they had kind of helped me swing into Iraq. Iraq wouldn't have happened really without them. And so then I made a permanent move after Turkey to Iraq, where I was based for 2 years before then leaving to go to Southeast Asia and write a book and shift, because by the time I finished Iraq, I had been in the field for about 7, had been in the Mideast for about 7. I had been in war zones. I was exhausted. After Mosul was really exhausting. You could talk to journalists who had just started out and journalists who had been doing it 30, 40 years, and everybody will say that covering Mosul and Raqqa, the 2 biggest places where ISIS had their stronghold, were the most difficult stories they have ever done, because Daesh had no rules. So no longer were journalists, and we've come up in a time where journalists aren't protected anymore. You can't wear press across your chest and expect to be protected. You're a target. And so that was, it was just a very heavy, very exhausting. Even the last 3 months in Mosul, we hit kind of a climax in the spring and summer of 2017. And I was out every other day. I wouldn't necessarily, because I would go out during the day to the field, I'd go out to the front line, and then I'd come back and spend a full day of live shots, writing an article, putting together pictures. I was one-woman band, so I was doing a little bit of everything for 2 or 3 different clients at any given time, like most of us were out there. And then I decided I'm exhausted, and it took me about a year to kind of get out of Iraq, because we had some aftermath. There was, you know, how the refugees are doing after Mosul was over and all of that, the politics, the first elections, all that shit. And by that time I was kind of swinging in 2018, I was starting to swing into places like Sri Lanka and Thailand and so forth, where I was kind of coming to a space where I wanted to shift my attention, and I didn't quite know where I was going with it. But I knew that I needed to start with writing the book, which is essentially what I did. And I began the summer of 2018, but then really picked up in 2019 and finished it this year. And in the course of all of that, then came birth, which was an idea that fully came to me when I went to Bali late last year, middle of last year. And you know, took space for me, for some internal healing, for some internal rest. You know, we look at war correspondents, and there are many who have done it for 20, 30, 40 years, and I admire the hell out of them. But I think I began to realize, I don't know if I want that to be the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard on the psyche and hard on the body. And so, and that shifted my focus on how I wanted to cover stories, how I wanted to look at stories. But yeah, we met all that time ago. I mean, it was 2020, it was 4 years ago that I think we met, and here we are in 2020.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
2020. Which, I mean, like, now that I'm thinking about it, especially in the context of, I remember the conversations that we had about Mosul and how, you know, insane that was. I mean, you know, 2020 is nothing compared to what those people and what you in proximity to them had to go through. I mean, that's, you know, I had to stay home.
It's just a different
Oh
kind.
no. Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think the things I think that's one of the things actually that in my book that I talk about is how do we take the war zones and bring them home? Because there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from war-torn people who have had to live their life, maybe war after war. One of my favorite photos is a photo that I took at one point in Mosul. A friend of mine, she and I, a colleague of mine, we were going in to cover a story. We weren't even going all the way to the front line that day. We were going to go kind of behind the front line to find people who had stayed, who were sort of coming out of their houses. And we were talking about, like, the story we were doing is food shortage. And there were definitely people who were going out to the garbage and finding anything they could, scraps that they could cook, to take it back home to their families. Well, on our way there, we're stopped kind of in a caravan with, Iraqi military and all of that were taking us in and leaving us and checkpoints. And I see in front of this mosque, there's a wall kind of in front of the mosque, and I see two older men who guarantee they probably fought in maybe the Iran-Iraq war. I mean, they were definitely older and have seen a few of these. And they were sitting in these chairs, and they had little mini cups of probably what was Arabic coffee and their prayer beads in their hands. And they were just talking like nothing, like there wasn't a blast that went off 200, 300 meters away, as if it was nothing. But this essence of survival, of this essence of knowing the storm is there, deal with it when I have to. For now, I'm going to try and enjoy a moment of just normal life. I'm going to try and find a way to be present right now. And that's what they were doing. I took this photo, and to this day, it's still one of my favorite photos because it's so simplistic. But it shows us that it's these men who are just sort of a calm in the middle of literally a war zone.
Yeah.
And there's so many lessons that we can learn from that. I tell people, when people try to understand what hope is, I said, look, hope is a mother picking up her child and knowing that if she leaves that corner, she could get shot in the crossfire. But her only chance of surviving at all is to do it anyway and get to the other side. So she's going to get up and she's going to run. And she might die. She has no attachment to the outcome because she might die on the way there, or she might not. But it is her only chance, because if she sits, she's going to die anyway. That building's going to be hit because that's the side that the fighting's happening. So to me, there's all these like little metaphors, these poetic metaphors that happen between ground zero of a war zone and our ideological war that's happening in 2020. As far as I'm concerned. So I'm kind of seeing a lot of parallels, but in a very different way.
And I mean, I feel like that, maybe talk a little bit about the book, because I feel like a lot of that, your journey in healing and the amount of hope that that you found in certain places in the way that you covered that kind of made it into the book. Could you speak a little bit to how that evolved?
Absolutely. So, I wanted to write a book that focused on the 9-month operation against Daesh in Iraq, which is what I covered. But I also knew that something else had to go into it. And there had to be a sense of reality into it, which meant I was going to have to dive deep into my own self. Things that maybe I've done healing work on before in my life, and maybe some things I still needed to. I think what helped me a lot was I finally got a chance to get back to my first love, which is writing. So I didn't enter the journalism field from the idea of, I'm going to be a great journalist, and here's all these journalists I love. Not that I didn't have those things, but I came in as more of an artist and a writer. I was a poet as a young kid. I went through domestic violence as a kid. Writing was my out. Music was my out. Creativity and art were my out. And so the things for me, and thankfully I actually had a youth pastor who's also an artist, and so he was very encouraging in that way. He and his wife both were just really encouraging to all of us, and so there was a piece of me that I felt like had been missing, because when you write news stories day after day after day after day, you learn to be a good news writer. You might develop your writing skills, but it's really boring. So because you have to make sure you regurgitate how many were dead, or the numbers, or the statistics, or whatever, the interviews. And there was something that was like, but there's so much more to storytelling. There's so much more to my story. And so as I began to kind of write about the behind the scenes spaces, where I was going in Iraq, there was something more that was going on in me that I think I needed to communicate. In the very first chapter that I open up with, was the only chapter I could open up with. And that was an experience I had at Batnaya, which was a small Christian town outside of Mosul that I went to a month after the operation had begun. And it was a Christian town where the Kurdish Muslim Peshmerga had essentially driven out Daesh, and they had restored the crosses on the steeple, and they were desperate for their Christian brothers to come home. And there was this unity, but there was also something else going on in me. I was opening a portal in myself, feeling like I was a frustrated journalist who was there on my own and just wanted a sense of sort of internal healing and justice to be within my heart. Like, what did that look like? And I was feeling it in that moment.
Right.
It was almost like, and I hadn't been in a church in years, and I'm not someone who believes in the institution of church or the institution of religion, but it was something that was significant because of where I had come from. And so when I started the book, it was almost immediate that I knew that it was that story I need to start with. It was like, this is where we need to cultivate it from. The book then goes into a few different things that I think culminate. It's a memoir in such that the lens of it takes place over the course of roughly that 9 months. Mm-hmm. However, I continually go back into my own life and my own flashbacks to look at where I had come from. And how did what I saw on the ground in a place like Mosul, more than the Lebanese-Syrian border, more than the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, what was it in Mosul that was so reflective of me? So, I started. So I talked about some of the domestic violence that I went through. My ex-marriage that I had when I was very, very young, it was deeply abusive. And then I started to also realize there was more to it than that. There was the human condition. There were things in here that even outside of my story, I was finding even just in the stories of my friends, my family, the people that I go to. We're talking about human condition. How do we divide ourselves and tribalize? How do we create things like belonging? How do we feel, why do we feel so lonely, and how do we create community? And I have 2 chapters that are actually dedicated to the kids that I met, but it's also dedicated to how we cultivate raising children in our communities now. Not even if you're not a biological parent, you're still part of the parenthood community, right? It takes a village, right? How do we vote for administrators for our schools? How do we vote for justice systems that are going to give kids more loving homes that they can get into? Why in the United States have we cultivated such a culture of violence in our children? And why are we okay with that? Yeah. Why don't we see a problem with that? Because meeting child soldiers opened my eyes to the fact that, we actually do this worse in America. This kid doesn't feel like he has a choice, but in America, he's got a choice. So there was a lot of things that were kind of coming into play as not just my own space to dismantle, but to also sort of unpack, how do we go forward and do it better? Solutions, ideas and philosophies and ways to think about this so that we can do it better. Because I didn't want my book to just be another war correspondence book. If you read a lot of war correspondence books, they will give you really cool behind the scenes. They'll give you the dramatic moment. Right. Bang. But what was really going on inside them? And how did it fuck them up? I was actually working on my book when the film came out about Marie Colvin. The name of the film was called A Private War. Mm-hmm. And ironically, the film was not advertised as a film about mental health, but that's what the entire film is about. Yep. The entire film is about her mental health and her incapacity. I love her legacy. I did not know her personally. I have friends who do. But I was there when we got the announcement that she died. I was at CNN, and the CNN team had literally just left one day before, and everyone was going, and she made the decision to stay one day. But why did she make the decision to stay one more day? Because in her mind, she was stuck in a loop that said, if I don't stay, I'm not going to get this, which a lot of journalists go through. The mental health of journalists does not get addressed. Well, you chose to go out there. Maybe somebody's got to tell the story, but that doesn't mean that our mental health isn't important. And it doesn't mean it doesn't screw people up. And so a lot of those themes of community, of solution-based thinking, of my own life dismantling, and of how we shift mental health, I think came into the story. The book is set up as almost like a series of essays. Susan Sontag actually used to write this way. She used to write her books. A lot of her writing was almost these series of essays that would get put together under the umbrella of a theme. And I feel like I kind of modeled that a little bit with how I wrote this piece.
I'm really proud of you for going at it with that direction, because again, you could have written just another badass war correspondent book, right? I mean, that I'm very confident you could just have done that, but going in and you know, our conversations about that, our conversations with Preemptive Love, the NGO that you introduced me to, and that obviously helped you and is still helping people in the Middle East. You had a choice to take those experiences and put them into something that can actually legitimately better other people's lives. And I'm really proud of you for doing that, because that you know, was obviously a much heavier thing to do, but ultimately I think it's going to end up being much more valuable. As far as Librarians United, what's the best place to find the book? Is it still just AskGallagher.com?
Yeah, you can go to ashgallagher.com/book, but it's at Barnes & Noble, and you can get it in paperback or ebook. I finally was able to get the paperback sorted, and it is available there. So if you've got an ebook reader you want to put it on, or if you want to order a paper book, they are shipping to the United States and Australia. Sadly, they stopped shipping to Europe for now during COVID. But it is available. And so it's called Reckoning in the Rubble by yours truly, Ash Gallagher. So check that out. And
that's the website, right?
Yep. You can actually just go to my site, ashgallagher.com/book, and you can find the button that you need to get it.
Cool. I mean, ashgallagher.com is worth going to anyway, because there's all sorts of cool shit on there. So that's fun. All right. Cool beans. All right. So all of this stuff, I think, you know, it positioned you to start thinking about doing this new project called Birth. Could you basically talk to us about how that was birthed?
Yeah.
I made a pun. Someone called Greg. I made a pun.
It's actually a good pun, and it's a pun.
Well, it's sitting right there, right? You almost don't have a choice.
I mean, and it's a pun that I sort of jokingly use, because it really is very much that there's a reason for it.
Right.
So birth is as the earth, so the body. As the body, so the soul, so the spirit. SOW, the spirit. I am a person who wants to take everything around the earth and our bodies and tie it to how that helps our soul, our mental health, our spiritual health, whatever it is you believe in, certainly as you're connected to energy, source, God, divine. But I think that we as communities around the world, we need more solution-based storytelling. And part of solution-based storytelling is understanding how we're so deeply connected to our bodies. A lot of social justice issues are around body shame, racism, sexism. A lot of the other isms are based on body shame that have hurt, tortured, imperialized against other people. I don't think I'm using that word right. Anyway, point is that what I also found is, I think being in Southeast Asia as well is once again my love for the earth. I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in Colorado. So for me to get back to places like the ocean, to be in the mountains, to be smeared with dirt, to have salt in my hair, all of these things helped me realize from a mental health perspective, from a physical perspective, how much better and how much more I thrived when I'm connected to the earth. Our First Nation brothers and sisters, our Indigenous brothers and sisters teach this. This is very much a part of their spaces. Yesterday was sadly a day that gets celebrated for the wrong person and the wrong reasons, but a lot of Indigenous people have stepped forward and say this should be Indigenous Land Day, and that's what it is, because there is a sense of us needing to get back to what are some ways that we can propel forward in these, in our communities and in ourselves, because healing starts with us. Healing starts right here. And number one, I think that what a lot has helped move me forward is getting reconnected to my body. There is a book and a concept by a man by the name of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he firmly believes, and I believe in a lot of what he teaches around the fact that our body, it records trauma. Our DNA records trauma. And I also believe that it records love, and it also records loneliness, and it also records everything we do. Our body is affected by it. It's affected by our environment. If we pollute it, it's affected. If we are taking care of it, it's affected. So our body and the earth are deeply, deeply, deeply connected. And to me, this is where we find the source of our healing, within the body and within the earth. And I wanted to create stories that were going to push us in a direction of understanding those things and finding out ways that we could touch those things. And that's everything from sexuality to climate change. That's everything from, skin color to how we reintegrate ourselves into things like farming and agriculture. So it crosses the spectrum, and by doing so, I think that we lift up our soul, we lift up our spirit, and we become not just better within ourselves, but we become better for our families and for our communities. And so birth was an idea that was literally birthed while I was saturated with nature around me. I was actually in Bali when I sort of came to the name. I was kind of moving in the direction that I wanted to, and then one day was kind of fiddling and playing with it, and then created a logo. I was around a lot of people who were doing a lot of creating. It's amazing when you go to a place like Bali and you meet a lot of expats from around the world who all come there and everybody leaves with an awesome idea, like a new idea for a thing. I met a fashion designer, and I met someone who was finishing their yoga training, and I met someone who was doing a different kind of tech business that they had never thought they would do before. So I was around a lot of people that were kind of getting their own ideas stimulated. And the logo is actually, if you look at sort of the element symbols, it's fire, water, and then the line through the top makes the top one air. And then I'm a Cancer symbol. Astrology is kind of interesting to me because I sort of take it with a grain of salt. I really love the stories more than I do the shall we say the debunked space theories. I mean, astrology is not a science, but what's interesting to me about astrologies is the stories. Like if you go back to the Babylonian times, like why did they feel that a crab was important, or why did they feel that the water bearer was important? These were parts of their society that they looked up in the sky and were like, oh, this must be the gods. So they developed stories around them. Cancer is actually considered sort of the mother of the zodiac. And so, I kind of loved the idea of creating a logo that sort of incorporated these stories. That's the interesting thing about the logo, is the logo incorporates story, earth and story. And I'm a storyteller. If nothing else, I'm a storyteller. And so that's what birth is. Birth is about solution-based thinking. And so it's also about helping people and communities come back to understanding our body and our earth, and creating ways forward so that we're not stuck in war zones, whether it's the war zone within or the war zone abroad, or whether the ideological war in front of SCOTUS. It's about creating spaces for healing and justice. And I think justice is a word of integration for me. And so that's what I want birth to be. So it's a storytelling portal. Right now, it is a podcast. I'm in the middle of working on season 2. If you haven't heard season 1, there's 29 episodes. COVID gave me the space to figure that one out. And so there's 29 on YouTube, Podbean, and Spotify, and iTunes. So most places where you get your podcast, you can find Birth Podcast. And I'm working on a debut film. And I am also, basically, I've started kind of a birth blog, but the idea is to turn Birth Blog into a magazine, a digital magazine eventually. So it's still in a lot of its development, but we've at least launched, and we're here. Well, I'm here. This is basically me right now, so.
Still, there's a lot going on. I got some links up for the film and just for birth and description and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the film is going to be interesting. The film, came to me actually over the summer. I was actually en route to Europe. My time in Malaysia during COVID was complete. Europe was opening up. I decided to come into Europe. And on my way here, there was an acquaintance that I know. He was putting up his yoga pictures, and he's a Black man, and he had a picture up of his hands behind his back doing a variation of a cobra, and his hands were clasped together, and he was wearing silver bracelets that day, and the photo was very much a close-up, and so you couldn't see the full picture of what he was doing. So it actually just looked like a man who was arrested on the ground. And this was not long after George Floyd and all of the protests that were taking place. And I wrote to him and I said, do you understand the irony of what you posted? Because he didn't say anything about it on his Instagram. And so the idea for the film came about, to do a film about Black men who are using yoga to get in touch with their body, and finding a sense of internal liberation. The war cry of our Black brothers has been, I can't breathe. So I began to think, what if we talk to men who say they can now, and they have found that way to do it? So we are in the middle of it. We at least started the project, and we're kind of in the middle of it, fundraising for it. And we still have 2 men to interview, plus post-production. And and I do take care of my donors. So anybody who donates gets weekly updates. They'll get the first preview when the film is finished, as well as a meet and greet with me and my crew, which is myself and 2 incredible Black women who are helping me shoot this. And because I really wanted it to be representative of a moment in history that needs to be just that. So that is the film. It's called And Then We Broke Free.
I like it. I like it a lot. It's something sparked. We actually just finished watching. It's a bit of an aside, but hopefully not too much.
No, of course.
We finished watching Schitt's Creek last night, and we had a hard time getting into it. It's sort of campy, like pseudo Canadian comedy, which I always kind of like anyway. But
right.
They made a point of, there's LGBTQ characters in it, and they sort of made a point of saying, okay, we're not gonna do this as the conflict. We're not gonna do this about the Black person being on the ground who can't breathe. We're gonna do it about the gay people who are just experiencing joy and like living the life that they can live. And Michelle and I were talking about it afterwards, because you're kind of talking about how that whole arc took place. And there's a spot where this, person who is newly coming into, kind of coming out as gay and in their first sort of awesome relationship, whatever, his parents don't know, and they create this big, problematic arc where they, find out too soon, yada yada yada. And you're that whole episode, I'm terrified because I know it's coming, right? The parents are going to be pissed off, and there's going to be all this conflict, and then they just don't. The parents were like, no, we're just mad you didn't tell us. Like, they just immediately relieve that tension, because their whole point in the beginning was like, the conflict is done. We see that everywhere in media when it comes to this stuff.
Right.
What does the alternative look like? Right? How could we make a description of what this is going to look like if this is all just working out really, really well? Right. And they did a fantastic job. And so I'm glad that you're taking it from that context, right? Because we want to, come in and build the opposite of the things that we are opposed to, right?
Absolutely. And that's the interesting thing. These gentlemen have stories that it's basically trauma to triumph. So we talk about the difficult circumstances that they went through, but I transition it to where they are now and how they got to that space and what they want out of the space they're in right now. Mm-hmm. And it makes me really proud. There's one of the gentlemen who's in Atlanta. We haven't filmed him yet, but I remember having a conversation with him and was expressing to him, kind of where we were, and we were kind of updating each other. And he said something to me that really struck me. He said, I represent my community. So if I can offer something to them, that is a way in, that is a way to touch a better way out, then it's my responsibility to do that. He doesn't have any of his friends that show up at his classes. He's kind of a bulky, muscular guy that teaches yoga in Atlanta, and he started out, we're doing martial arts, and a lot of his friends still do martial arts because that they all want to be fighters and tough and everything.
Yeah.
But he's doing this thing called yoga, and yet he's found so much rejuvenation in his body, in his soul, in his being, and he wants to be able to bring that as a place of breath to the communities, to young men, to young boys. I had an athlete who asked me at one point, they said, do you think that this film will create a space where people can just breathe, even if they can't do all the great yoga poses? I said, oh yeah, because to me, it's not really about the yoga. It is, but it isn't.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to tap into healing, to tap into your internal justice, right? I love the quote. One of my favorite quotes of all time is Cornel West's quote that, justice is what love looks like in public. Let's start with ourselves. Do we love ourselves? Do we have a place where we can understand what loving ourselves looks like, loving the people in our community, making peace with that, making peace with our trauma, working out our trauma, sweating out our trauma, feeling it and sweating it out, and so to me, that's really what it's about. Yoga is just the portal. Yoga is the tool. It's not the point. And so the idea is to get to the other side, to have something to talk about, because people are tired. Our Black brothers and sisters, they're tired. Our LGBTQ, brothers and sisters in community, tired. They fight. They keep fighting, and we should fight with them. But there has to be more than just demanding that Washington do what it's supposed to do. There has to be more than that.
I agree. And again, those fights are fights that we absolutely need to have. And that's it, in the context of Chirp and the social media experiment that we're doing. People like Andrew Yang, for example, are doing advocacy like crazy, trying to get the big data and the big social media companies to basically come in line and maybe run some legislation on regulation, that kind of thing. And we're over here just like, why don't we just build it? Like, what does this next thing look like? And of course, that's potentially at least as heavy a task, if not heavier, depending on who you're asking. But that's why I was really excited to be part of this, because at least, again, we can start trying to build the opposite of what we don't like, instead of constantly trying to push back against, right? Because some of the times when you're fighting against something, you're actually just giving that thing energy, whereas what you're doing is literally building its opposite. How do we approach healing and approach joy and give people space and give people more tools and more access and more examples of people breathing, which I love that about what you're doing.
Thank you. I also love that. I think about some of what you were talking about with what you're doing as far as, everything from, Chirp and all of that, because in my mind, it's a sense of economic justice, right? It's a sense of helping people understand what happens when we give to each other, when we provide for each other, when we, kind of support each other in maybe a more economical mindset, rather than what we've been dealing with for, decades and longer in sort of this economic system that's actually beat us down. Mm-hmm. That's caused us to get so exhausted, and I've been affected by that, and you've been affected by that. And so by creating something different, we're changing the conversation. We're going deeper into the conversation. Joy is found in the morning. And I say morning, MOURING. And I think when we begin to sort of recognize the problem, then we can sort of almost, it's almost like when you begin to allow yourself to mourn the truth of what's actually happening, you begin to actually find the joy in it, because you've learned how to kind of sit with it. And I think that goes back all the way back to the example of the two men in Mosul.
Right.
They knew how to just sit with the bombs and bullets that were on the other side of the wall. They accepted that they were there. They expressed their sorrow in the times when they need sorrow. But when they have a moment where they can just sip coffee and play with their beads and talk and, bitch about the prime minister in Baghdad, well, there's joy in that. They can tell a good joke. They can laugh. Iraqi people are some of the funniest people I've ever known. They know how to make a joke in the middle of it all.
That's The mother of all coping mechanisms. All right, so thank you for coming on. I mean, this
Yeah,
is a great example of the people that are on Chirp, that are sort of keeping it alive as we finish building it and put it all together. I was excited about doing ChirpCast initially because I want people to be able to get to know in detail the people that are sort of the early adopters, and I think this is a really good example of that. I have 2 questions.
Yes.
And then we're done. Number one, and we're kind of leading into this already. What are you most concerned with about social media?
My biggest concern, I think, is our inability to, and granted, I have watched The Social Dilemma, but our inability to recognize our addiction to it,
Mm-hmm.
and our need to recreate the algorithm in a sense, from both a practical sense as well as an internal sense, right? Our own internal algorithms get us up in the morning to doom scroll through Facebook and get into arguments that are meaningless and get us nowhere. And I think when it comes to social media, there needs to be a sense of understanding the addiction and then changing it. I don't know how we do that. Maybe it's we hold each other accountable. Maybe it's through things like, when we log on to Chirp and we say, okay, what are we grateful for, rather than all of the bullshit, that gets posted on a regular basis with social media. Maybe that's it. But I think it's just flipping the script on being able to say, can we admit our addiction to it? And what are the solutions, both on and offline, that we can do to manage our conversation?
Yeah. That I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's something I spent a lot of time thinking about. And I mean, initially that's where I as the sort of minister of culture, as I dubbed myself for Chirp, I wanted to set it up so that on this show and everywhere else, I just promote the idea. We embed in the initial culture that you can make the choice, you can create some intentionality around coming to Chirp before you open any other thing, and go straight to gratitudes. I mean, you can do whatever the hell you want, obviously, right? But going straight to gratitude, I mean, that shit'll improve your life. We know it, right? So that level of intentionality is that's one thing, that one moment that we drag back, so we're actually thinking about it. And then on the flip side, of course, we're never going to run an algorithm on Chirp. We want it to be an opt-in. We want it to be an intentional process, right? If you want information about birth, you're going to follow the birth channel. If you want information about, or if you want to follow on, or if you want to post in gratitudes, you're gonna follow that. And before too long, that feed, only what you have opted into will be the only stuff that you get. So we're at least trying to address it a little bit that way. But yeah, that I think about that all the freaking time.
Intentionality is the word that I think you use a lot, that I like a lot, and I think that's what it is creating intentionality rather than relying on it to feed to feed a fix.
That habit. Because I mean, I've experienced it too, where you find yourself scrolling Facebook, you have no idea how long you've been doing it, and there's no fucking point to it. Right. And then Facebook will serve you something that's going to piss you off for the sole purpose of getting you to jump into the comments and create more energy around an idea and an argument that will not resolve. It's not designed to resolve. You're not going to convince anyone of anything. You're not going to accomplish anything of any worth whatsoever, except giving more eyeball milliseconds to a company that's going to make $80 billion in the United States this year.
And I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to do now is with Facebook, I don't spend actually that much time scrolling, but I do check the groups that I'm in, because I'm in a few groups, and then there's a few pages that I follow that I really enjoy following, and I kind of jump in on them. But outside of that, I try not to spend too much time doing a whole lot of scrolling. If you're not in the top 3 or 4, I might not see you. And I've actually taken as far as some of my closer relationships, and pulled them off Facebook and into my WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is just a more communication portal, and I prefer that communication versus I don't even have Messenger on my phone. So for me it's these little things that I think in the past several months, or maybe in the past year, that I've been trying to do, because I used to be able to take long breaks off of Facebook, and I can't quite do that anymore. But what I can do is I can create. I can, with intention, create how I want to engage, and that helps. That helps with the addictive nature to it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, one more question.
Yep.
What are you most excited about social media?
Well, I do like the ability to connect across the world. And I mean, look, you and I wouldn't be friends if we hadn't had some of those avenues to do that. I mean, granted, we met through a common friend through Bosun, and I'm so grateful for that introduction. But at the same time, like, it's also been social media that's helped us kind of cultivate the conversations, the relationship, shows like this, opportunities like this, and so that part is really exciting. People still use social media for things like protests. It's why governments scramble to shut it down, in foreign countries, because they don't want people protesting. But I think that there is such a positive element to that part of it. And I think we can continue to try and cultivate and build that idea of connecting with others and connecting with them in ways where we can connect off the social media portal and into a more personal, like FaceTime. I heard a psychotherapist recently. She said, look, FaceTime is better than zero. So if I can't be in person with you because you're so far away, at least we have an opportunity. We have a moment where we can be face to face on screen, and I can still look at your facial expressions and respond and react to you in a slightly more personable way. And so for that, I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, it has that inherent value, which is always the point, right? Like the whole point was to bring us together. Brian Bosun, who introduced us. I mean, I wouldn't have still been connected with him, who I met in San Diego, unless it was for Facebook. So that the serendipity of all those different connections, I think, was always the point, right? And we could keep that. We could still build that, into how we do social media. But yeah, we can basically take the reins and make it designed for us and utilized by us, as opposed to just being the fodder in the cannon. Ash Gallagher, thank you so much for coming and hanging out. I'm going to throw up a couple more links. You got /birth film, and there was the one for the book as well. Librarians United, thanks for your comments today. You are fantastic. Thanks for hanging out with us. And to everybody watching this later, we haven't had a ChirpCast for a while, and we're back. We got some more stuff that's getting booked as we go. There's going to be probably at least 2 coming out every week as we go here, and lots of stuff coming to Chirp within the next 7 days, I think. So
yeah,
yippers!
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and you guys keep listening to ChirpCast, and also check out Birth Podcast as well. And I hope that we can expand and cultivate more community out of all this.
Amen. All right. Thank you, sister.
Thank you.